Oh, might have lost a bunch of people here. Hello. There we go. One, two, three, four, five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Um, a couple more, you guys. Where are you at? Okay. Let me kind of go back here on this one. So we can decline to process an IR if the decrease is less than 10%. We have to process it if it's over the 10%, um, except we're not going to consider any increase in the earned income for a household when we're calculating their adjusted income unless they previously received an IR reducing that their earned income during the certification period. So basically, we're not going to do an IR for a job increase if they didn't have an IR for a job reduction. Doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, which is why we kind of need a little bit more info from HUD. But the big takeaway from this is the 10% factor. Also, the other nice thing is that if we're 3 months away from their recertification, we can decline to process an IR regardless of the amount or any such thing. We could just push it off until the AR regardless of the amount. Rural development, a little on this. This year, because the COLAs went so high, they did put out a new notice saying that they would do the same 200% threshold that HUD was doing because the $100 one or $50 threshold that they had would have caused a whole mess of research there in January because the COLA was so high. So if they're following HUD on that, I imagine they will just continue to follow suit and put out a new notice, and the threshold will change for the rural development research as well. Okay. Um, the effective date for the interim recertification. Um, there's two main factors for determining an IR's effective date: when and or if things are reported, and two, whether the change would cause the rent to go up or down. It's not really much change with that. But first, what is still the same here is if the increase is reported timely within that 30 days of our policy, it's the same as before. They're entitled to a 30-day notice of rent increase. If the change is not reported timely within the 30 days, it's still the same as before. We would implement any resulting rent change retroactively to the first of the month back to when that change occurred that led to the IR. For example, on 5/10, we verified their unreported jobs started on 3/10. They didn't report it to us in time, so the IR would be effective back to 4/1, the first of the month following that change. So here is what's newish. If the decrease change is not reported timely, we must implement any resulting rent decrease no later than the first rent period following completion of the reexamination. So, for example, on 3/25, a resident reports their income decreased back on 1/5, on January 5th, so a couple months ago. We complete the verification on 4/4, a couple weeks later. Well, the IR is going to be effective on 5/1. They didn't report the thing to us timely, so we can't go back and do anything retro with it. We go back to the first rent period following completion of our processing of the verifications. So even though if they reported it on 3/25, we didn't finish it till 4/4. So the first one following when we finished it, all the verification is 5/1. Okay, so here's what's newish. The rent decreases may be applied retroactively based on our discretion and our own policy. It's not reported timely due to some sort of like exception for like VAWA or a limited English proficiency thing. But whether we decide, we would have to say what those cases are, but then we could go back and backdate those changes. But the decrease may not be that retroactive effective date may not be applied prior to the later of the first of the month following the date of the change, or the effective date of the last most recent full certification. So what this does is just limits how far back we can do this retroactive thing. So to keep going with the example, if a family has an AR on 5/1, then on 7/10, they report that they had a decrease of income that occurred back in January, but they didn't report it to us because of some domestic violence issue or whatever, and we have that exception. We can we can do the rent reduction retroactive back previously. We wouldn't have to do it on 8/10 or 8/1. We could do it retro, but we can't go all the way back to when it actually occurred on 1/10. We can't do a 2/1, the first of the month following that. We would have to do 5/1 because that's when their annual recert was. We can't go past that last full certification. Does that make sense? Well, it's kind of a roundabout way that I'm saying it, but really boils down to when we can apply rent decreases. Obviously, if they fail to report a rent increase, we're going back right, to when it started. But a decrease is kind of just a benefit for them that's been taken away for the most part. If they fail to tell us in time, it's their own fault. They income changed and they didn't let us know in time. Well, we can't do it unless it's one of these rules that we kind of come up with that has something to do with like a reasonable accommodation or VAWA, etc. But I will have that policy out at some point here. It's one of the 50 million things that has to be created or updated. But is there any questions with that idea with the IRs? Okay. The last couple little changes here. The first one's called the de minimis errors. What that means is that we are not going to be out of compliance with HUD solely due to a de minimis error, which is an error where our determination of adjusted income deviates from the correct adjusted income by no more than $30 a month or $360 annually. So we're doing manual calculations of assets and things like that, or just leaving off the cent on something with EIV or Social Security wouldn't necessarily be a finding on an MOR or whatever. We're still required to correct these changes once we are aware of them, and of course refund any overpaid rent or whatever the case may be. But it kind of gives us a little bit more leeway on those instances where we transpose a couple numbers, typing something in, and it affects the rent by $1 or not their rent, but their income by a couple of dollars or something. And a lot of times we have these little issues, and the rent, it doesn't change the rent at all. It has nothing to, there's no effect on it. It was just one little number pushed in here, yet it's just as much of a finding as anything else. So this should hopefully get rid of a lot of the nitpicking from North Tampa going forward. That de minimis error amount is also adjustable each year based on inflation, so that could increase as well. The other change here, the race and ethnic data reporting form, there's been drafts of that for years now out and around. They just never got around to implementing it, but it basically expands on a few different category codes for just a few of the different race and ethnicities. Like if they're marked that they're Hispanic, then there's some extra boxes for whether they're Puerto Rican or Cuban or Mexican or some other thing. And for Asian, there's different subcategories of that, and the Hawaiian Pacific Islander one. Now, there will be a new form, and we'll probably be having them fill that out or requesting that they disclose the information with their next AR. Of course, it's still optional whether they provide the actual race and ethnicity stuff, but they still have to complete the form with their information and sign it. But these new subcategory codes, they won't actually display on the 5.9. They're still just going to have either Hispanic or not, and then whatever race or ethnicity thing that they pick. So if we get that particular field wrong, nobody else, there's no real oversight of that particular change, just that we have the form itself in the file once we process an AR. Obviously, you would still want to match everything to the form with the system and all that stuff. So moving on now, streamlining. So like what is the best answer to all of these crazy changes that are coming up? It really boils down to streamlining. It's been around for a while. I developed policies for it several years ago. We just never really implemented it, primarily because that asset threshold of $5,000, which allowed for self-certification, was exceeded by the majority of our residents. So it eliminated a large function or a large facet of the streamlining procedures, and we just never really found a good purpose for it. Now that it's up to 50,000 and potentially more going forward, it's a lot more realistic. And since we are alleviated of a lot of the complications for how to calculate assets and income, as far as HOTMA's rules here in 2024, we're alleviated from those by using streamlining, and it could potentially just make your guys' job a good bit easier. There's really no reason not to, kind of, at this point. So what streamlining basically is it allows us to only have to do full traditional verification every 3 years instead of every single annual recertification. So in year one, as the schedule kind of goes, you do a full verification of all their income and assets and expenses and all that stuff. And then in years 2 and 3, you just accept self-certification from them, and that's it. You still have to verify expenses. There's no self-certification of medical expenses, but if you have your residents kind of trained pretty well to just bring in their receipts or their printouts from the pharmacy, then you just have those. You don't need to send anything else out, really, unless they don't have a receipt and need to really want to claim something. But again, that threshold is a little bit higher now. So if they're just, when I went to the doctor 1 or 2 times for a couple of copays, that may not even qualify to begin with. So you could kind of say, well, if it's not over the X amount, then there's really no point in doing it. Of course, if they're adamant about it, you still got to do it. But at least with the income and expenses, we can take what they say. So there's 3 facets of this. The first one is verification of fixed income. This is the earliest one. It's been around for since the beginning, and it allows us to streamline and accept self-certification of any fixed income source. So basically, Social Security, pensions, anything that's not fixed. Really, we didn't do much with that because if you have EIV, it works better. But we would, with that self-certification, we would take what they say is the amount. We would use the published COLA for the year and then calculate the new amount. Again, with EIV, this is super easy. It already just gives us the information. But for like a Florida pension or like a railroad pension or the VA pensions or whatever, if we know the amount that it's supposed to increase, then we can just take that COLA and manually calculate what their new amount is going to be, put it in the software, and then we're done for the fixed income. For assets in years 2 and 3, we can accept self-certification for all assets as long as the total is under that $50,000 asset threshold. They can self-certify the value of the asset and the income that they think that it's making, if any. And whatever they put on that form is all we got to do. We don't know further verification is required, is literally written into the law for this whole streamlining stuff. Now, obviously, if something looks wonky or something is clearly wrong, then we would need to go on ahead and do the proper verification of stuff. But for the most part, we can just be done with it. Can they get away with stuff? Yeah, probably, sure. Does it really matter? Like, assets really don't affect a whole lot with the rent calculation for the most part. It's the income stuff that's really the more important part. But so I think that's why HUD is being a little bit more lenient and just letting them kind of say what it is and checking on them every few years instead of every year. The third facet here is called certification for fixed income families. And what this does is kind of builds on the verification of fixed income, and it allows us to streamline not fixed income, so job income or something like that, or gifts, regular gifts or something that's just not a regular fixed income, as long as they're a fixed income family. And the definition for a fixed income family is that their at least 90% of the household's income is from fixed sources. So if you have, as long as it's 90% Social Security and not more than 10% of some little part-time job, they can we can do the COLA for EIV, and then on their job they can self-certify how much their income is for the job, and we can accept that, or we can, in the following year, we can just use the same amount that we had on the 5/9 from before, whichever seems more reasonable at the time. But it saves a lot from having to go in and try to verify jobs that employers are in that I can't think of the name of that system now, where you can't even get your pay stubs anymore. Um, the work number, that thing is kind of a pain in the ass. So there's these three different functions that kind of all work together to allow us to speed up the process in years 2 and 3. How do we implement that? Well, we have to have a procedure for income and procedure for streamlining assets, which I kind of had before, and I've already updated those now. They're still kind of working, but they're in forms now, and they're rather detailed about what you do with the procedure in year 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to have to revise the questionnaire, the research questionnaire, to kind of eliminate certain questions, but some of the questions are still required. And you're still going to have to do it annually, but there will also now be a self-certification of income and for assets that they will also do annually. There is a little bit, they do almost everything on the form because it's a self-form, but there's a couple parts on there where you guys will be doing something like to determine whether the calculation to determine if they're a fixed income family, or adding up the asset income, all the fun actual number crunching comes down to you guys. We'll also have to revise the tenant file checklist to kind of keep track of the years that these people are in, because as residents move in and stuff like that, there's one resident could be on year 1, another one could be on year 3, and the easiest way to keep track of when you need to do that full verification is just to have it right there on the checklist in the file. Now you are streamlining income and assets as two separate things, but you can do one or the other or both. Obviously, both is better, but you want to definitely keep those years in line, whether you're doing one or the other. If something breaks the cycle in year 2 of assets, like they go over that, suddenly they have $60,000 in assets this year. Well, you can't accept self-certification of assets if they're over that threshold. So that breaks that cycle for the asset streamlining. So you want to keep that in line with the income one. If you're on that same year, you basically just go back to year 1 for both income and assets. You always want to just keep them in line, otherwise it gets way too confusing. Ineligibility, you want to use streamlining as much as possible for anybody who's actually eligible for it under the asset limits and all that fun stuff. But certain people, it's not possible. If they have a repayment agreement, obviously you can't trust the things that they say, so they're not eligible for streamlining in any case. Or if they have some uncured lease violation, or they just refuse to cooperate with recertifications or sign forms, then obviously they can't be part of streamlining either, because they're going to get terminated. So it's not perfect for everyone, but the people that it does work for, it will be great. So briefly, the first year you're doing that full verification, right? And it can be any year or every year, or it doesn't really matter. Any year that they're not qualified can be the first year 1. So we can count whatever research you did in 23 as the year 1 for this, and do year 2 with their first 203A cert in 2024, which will eliminate having to deal with the weird way to include income and whatever else on assets we would just apply the COLA for Social Security, and then be done with that for, sorry, the weird way of looking back 12 months for calculating income. They're still gonna do the questionnaire, the self-certifications. We accept it if they're under, and use the IV for their income. When you get into those year 2s and 3s, you just kind of make a copy of their previous, of the whatever you used in the previous year. So by year 3, you have a copy of year 2's certifications or whatever you use to verify their income or assets, just as evidence to show how you got to there every time you calculated a COLA or whatever else. As I mentioned, it's not really always the answer. A lot of you guys, they're residents, they only have Social Security and a bank account. Streamlining of fixed income isn't always necessarily useful when we have EIV. We can just pull the EIV reports and stick it in there and be done with it. But there, there's a few ways we can kind of look at these scenarios. So if they have Social Security and just the assets under the $50,000 threshold, just streamline their assets only and use the EIV for Social Security. If they have a pension, then you can streamline both. If they have a job and a small enough asset, then you can streamline their assets, but you can't streamline their wage income because it's over that 10%. I'm sure, I don't think there's very many of you guys that have only workers or residents that only work and don't have Social Security, but it could exist. If they have both, then it's possible that you could be just streamlining their Social Security and their wages and accept self-cert of their certifications. And except for a couple of receipts or medical expenses, maybe you don't even have to send anything out at all. You're just signing a couple of forms and you're basically done with it. Already talked about the cycle break, and I will put out a little bit more information on the procedures and stuff, how to go through this in the next couple of weeks or so here. I just kind of wanted to give you a gigantic, confusing overview of the whole thing, but hopefully you can see the light at the end of the tunnel for that particular aspect. It is a helpful thing. To track stuff. So there's a few things that we have to do to kind of get things ready before we flip the switch. HUD's doing the testing and stuff right now, but really we don't know when the software will make it available. It could be a few months into the year, next year, like I had mentioned before. So the first property that does it, I'm probably just going to do it one property at a time until I figure out how it all goes. And I'll be working with you guys and doing that switch. But you guys will have to make sure on that final voucher before the switch that the stuff on your voucher, all the tenants and their rent payments matches what's in track. That the data is there. So when we go and switch to the new one, we don't have to worry about trying to fix stuff in 202D when we're already in 203A, because that doesn't really work out too well when you're in a new system trying to fix it the old way. So we just need to make sure all the residents are there in the right units with the correct payment amount. You guys all have access to Trax. You may or may not use it very frequently, but you do. I need to make sure all the repayment agreement stuff matches, but shouldn't be too much stuff. But again, I will work with you guys on each one or each property individually. There's a whole lot of new fields and stuff on the 5.9s. They got rid of sex and changed it to gender. Now it can be a blank. They don't have to actually pick something. It doesn't force you to put male or female on the 5.9s anymore. You can put just did not provide or something along those lines. It's about to kick me off, but the rest of the stuff really isn't as important. So really that's all I have. So if you have any other questions or anything about this, we can, oh no, I guess I have 10 minutes here. other little point here I wanted to point out is with suspensions and terminations, it's not just terminations anymore. They're basically allowing you to suspend subsidy when the reason for the end of subsidy is not the tenant's fault. So like if it's substantial rehab or a presidentially declared disaster, we're not terminating them with a regular termination. We're just suspending it because it wasn't their fault. The terminations, though, there's also a new termination code for when the sole family member dies. So in those instances with you guys that are terminating subsidy where the only person there died, but you don't have possession of the unit yet because the kids didn't give you the keys or turn it over, instead of doing a termination other to change them over to conventional and charge them the market rent for the after the 14 days after death, we now have this new termination type specifically for that. It is, what the hell was it? DE, death. Yeah, nice and convenient little name there. That was really the important part for that one. Let's see. On the vouchers, you're going to see a whole lot more activity for every single transaction that goes into play on part one. So you're going to see when a unit goes off as well as when a unit goes on. I don't really know what that looks like yet, but from what I've read, it's just a whole lot of more stuff on there. So if you had 20 pages of part one, you're probably going to have a whole lot more going forward, especially if you have a lot of adjustments and move-ins, move-outs. Part six, the repayment agreement form is also being changed up a little bit and adding new columns for tracking more dates and information. Part of the stuff that I have to do with that, getting the repayment agreement balances matched out, is to make sure everything is in line for when this comes into play, because there's a lot of extra data. But that's more on me than you guys. That's it. That's all I got. So there is a lot of things going on. There's a lot of forms and policies that I have to update. Everything from the applications to the resident selection plans to the checklist and new policies and all kinds of fun stuff. So it is kind of a work in progress. I'm going to try to prioritize the things that you might need here next month. But that's really all my focus right now, is trying to do all of these fun things. If there's anything you guys are extremely concerned about or still confused about, I'll be happy to try to help or answer, but I don't have exact answers for everything yet. Does anybody want to ask anything? We got a few more minutes.
Brian, go ahead.
Brian, on the properties, when somebody moves out of our property, other properties are requesting the 5059s. Are we doing that?
Yeah, you certainly can. You can give it to the former resident and they can bring it to them. I mean, they're entitled to anything in the file. If the new landlord signs or has them sign a verification giving you consent or whatever, then yeah, you can send them that information.
Okay.
Because it's going to be more relevant with this stuff now, especially with the phase in for the expenses and stuff. They're going to want to see some of that stuff to carry on the phase in.
Brian, with the income for 2024, we always had a cutoff period for when we would start using the new income. Does this affect that in any way?
You mean like the COLA after April or?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're still going to use what's in EIV if we're using EIV, but we've always had the option to manually calculate the COLA if we want. But if we're streamlining the income, then we're just going to manually calculate the COLA or take what's in EIV. I don't know that it changes those requirements. We would still, by April, we most certainly should be using the new amount. especially if doing the streamlining. I don't know how this 12-month, previous 12 months period for the annual research specifically is going to play out quite yet, but I'm still pushing North Tampa to tell me specifically what that means and how.
So we don't know yet if that starts in 2024 or not.
It starts in 2024. Just don't know what that means or what is really starting. Like, are we going to use the amount, the 2024 COLA, or are we supposed to use what they received in the last 12 months through 2024 as their income in the last 12 months of 2023 for their income in 2024? Because that's what the rule says, is to use the last 12 months, which seems to make no sense. So somebody moves in, you're using their current income, and then their very first AR, you're using the same income again because you're going back 12 months to that move in, basically.
But what about people you're doing ARs for?
That's what I'm saying. That first AR, you're supposed to be taking the 12 months that precedes that AR to calculate the income instead of the current amount like we are now.
So if we were in that 4-month window of time, we count where people where like we don't have their income yet. Would we count from 2022?
No. If you're still, so with the January through April research, I would say that we just try to do that streamlining thing. And if I don't have an answer, but by the time we have to actually finalize some of these things, we'd say that we're doing the streamlining, print the EIV report, and then manually calculate the COLA, and then enter that into the software. Because if we're doing the streamlining, what's that?
If we manually enter the COLA, we're increasing it. We're not using it from the previous year.
Right. But if we're streamlining it, then those rules don't apply.
Oh. And we have the
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that streamlining seems like a viable solution to a lot of the problems or sticking points that are created by a lot of these new HOTMA rules, especially the ones that aren't fully clarified.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. So if their assets are under $50,000, we don't need to impute any income. Is that correct, Brian?
Correct.
On the self-certification form, the resident is the one that's going to be reporting what the interest rate is on their bank accounts, and that's so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
They can put the interest rate, or they can put whatever they think the actual amount they're getting is. Even if they're not going to know what imputing is, so they're not really going to hopefully be calculating percentages or anything like that. So, but if they did put something on the form, that doesn't mean we have to include it. We could just write a note saying this is not, there's no imputing if it's under 50,000. Although if it's over 50,000, we wouldn't be using any of those numbers anyway. We would have to do the self-verification.
So, but for
third-party verification
assets like bank accounts under 50,000, we would use actual income, even if they're self-certifying.
Yeah, we're always actual income, no matter what. Yep.
And the actual income is just based off of whatever they write on that form. They might say, I have 2% interest on my checking.
Yep.
Go by that. Okay.
And we're like, okay, fine, 2%. As long as it's under 50,000 for the assets, we take what they say, and that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's going to cut me off now because it's less than a minute. So thank you guys. And if you have questions, I'm here for emails, calls, whatever you want. Go enjoy lunch.
Hey, Brian, is this entire PowerPoint available every page that you showed us?
Yeah, I'll put it in the drive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.